welcome everyone. And I'm going to give the floor to the founding initiatives of OSMI. So the French Minister of Higher Education and Research and Université de Lorraine, represented by Nicolas Fressanjas. INRIA, represented by Laurent Romary. PLOS, represented by Ian Rinaskevich. Charité, represented by Yevgeny Bobrov. Spark Europe, represented by Vanessa Proudman, and UNESCO, represented by Anna Persic. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and the floor is yours, Nicolas, to start.
Well, thank you very much, Laetitia, and thank you very much for the Coordination Committee for organizing all this. So I'm very pleased and honored to start this meeting, to open this meeting. And to do that, the question you have asked me to answer is why is this initiative important? Why is OSMI important? Well, to answer that, I can say that it's as important as open science is, because if we want to make progress, if we want to go forward with open science, well, we have to know where we are now, where we have to know where the progress need to be made, where we want to focus our efforts. So if I want to go to what I know, it's the French policy in the ministry. The French Monitor for Open Science is a key component of the French policy, and just as what I told you about is where we are, what we want to do, and how much are we open. And I can also cite, but I'm sure Anna will tell more about this later. It's also a key element in the monitoring is also a key element in the UNESCO policy on open science, recommendation of UNESCO. So why is OSMI so important in the framework of monitoring? Well, for me, there are two main reasons. The first one is, well, let's do things together. Let's do things together. Let's try to collaborate, to join effort, share effort, and well, to share what we did. So not to reinvent the wheel if somebody did the same thing. And that's one thing that is very important. Do things in common. But another one is try to agree on some basic things, some principles on monitoring. Why should we do that? Is it to do something all the same all over the world? Certainly not, because probably people don't have the same needs. And I think there is a working group on that, on what are the needs for open science monitoring. So what I can think of is if we sort of agree of something in common, then anyone can pick up what they need in a toolbox, or share their toolbox. So common framework would help in that, but it doesn't certainly mean uniformity. And if we have some principles which are aligned, then we can hope to be able more to share common tools and views on what is monitoring. And then again, if we have common principle, then we can see, and maybe we can give help to people, to countries who may need it. So I think this OSMI initiative is, well, a key contribution for the success of the UNESCO recommendation of open science. So thank you very much to be so numerous attending this, and I wish you a very fruitful meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. So that was your answer for the question why OSMI is important. And now I'm going to give the floor to Laurent Romary from INRIA in France as well.
Hello, everyone. So first, a little word concerning INRIA, because not everyone may know it. It's the French National Research Organization in Computer Science and Applied Mathematics. So we've got a national range, and we've been involved together with our colleagues from the French Ministry of Higher Education and Research and the Université de Lorraine in the French Open Science Monitor, in particular to develop methods for identifying software references and research data references in publications. And as a matter of fact, I mean, for a computer science organization, software is very important. And we are trying to see how we can derive the experience we gain from the monitor into specific, I've seen hands behind the head, sorry. We've seen the use of such principles for our own monitoring within the INRIA institution. So trying to have a dashboard of software within publications for all our research teams is really essential. One of the other aspects that is really interesting for us, it relates to what Nicolas said in terms of sharing. It's sharing infrastructures, because putting together an open science monitor requires some computing capacity, of course, but even more to share the kind of data and data management methods that we need across various types of monitors. So that's one of the things I would like to pursue in the context of OSMI in any case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurent. And now to Ian from PLOS. Why is OSMI important for you?
Thanks, Letitia, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today. Well, at PLOS, where I work, we've thought for a while that we need better evidence on the prevalence and effects of open science, and that should be done according to common principles. And it's really encouraging to see that there are many people that seem to believe this is something that we should work on together. But of course, the aspects of open science, whether those are outputs, processes, or outcomes or effects, that the aspects are important, may be different for different organizations, regions, and individuals, but there are also most likely shared needs and therefore shared potential solutions for monitoring open science. So I think one reason OSMI is really important is it provides a much needed neutral and global forum for different organizations, stakeholders, individuals to understand and discuss their monitoring goals and needs, and I hope in the future to collaborate to find potential solutions. Via the working groups in particular, I'm looking forward to seeing how different providers, indexes, and archives of all kinds of scholarly outputs can both enable the monitoring of open science by others and engage in monitoring themselves, but of course, all according to common principles, which has been the first thing that we've been working on together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Same question for you, Yevgeny from Charité.
Thanks. So I'm representing the Charité, which is a large university medical center, and my perspective is not only but primarily institutional. So I think we are doing a lot of monitoring. Generally, a lot of open science monitoring is being done, but I still see a lot of need and also potential to harmonize. And I think this will help everybody to interpret our findings the same way, and we really speak and we mean the same things. And when we get outputs also from monitoring tools, that we really understand in the same way and kind of agree on how this is to be interpreted. And I think this harmonization will also help institutions to draw conclusions and ultimately also devise better strategy with regard to open science. So this is why I'm part of it and how I'd like to contribute. And I also hope to cross-link to other initiatives like Force 11. And yeah, I'm looking forward to working with everybody here.
Thank you very much. Vanessa for Spark Europe, why is OSMI important?
So what is there left to say? So I have to say that there are a number of points mentioned by some of my colleagues already, but I think many of us are working to make open the default. So how do we know when we get there? So to what extent is open science being taken up, but also what impact is it having on science, scholarship, and society? So I think we really need to look at that together, following those principles globally, and so that we can actually compare this data across stakeholder groups, but across borders as well. So we really need to take this holistic approach, serving the needs of different stakeholders who want to monitor their success, but also to monitor some of those unintended consequences, perhaps of open science. And I think what we're also seeing, there are some threats with AI and research security that are intimidating the opens, if you like. So all the more is it necessary for us to have really concrete evidence to support open science on different levels, qualitative and quantitative. So we can use that in our advocacy efforts as well. So I think that's really important. And I think it's also really important that we build capacity in this area. There are some countries who have spent a lot of time and effort and have strong capacity, and there are others who have less so. So we can join forces and work together in certain areas. So I think that's important. And particularly, we have little evidence on the economic impact of open science. That's something I would be keen to pursue later on, not immediately, but I think that would be really important, particularly as so many of us are getting cuts in the university sector and even on the governmental levels. So I think that's important. And then I think last but not least, on a practical level, there are increasing policies on national, regional and local levels, internationally also. And I really want to make sure that we're not doing all this double reporting. So how can we keep that to a minimum by following some common standards or collecting information so that you don't have to report to many instances, or at least that the data is the same. So if we could strive to do that, I think it would be great going forward. So there's lots of ideas, and it's all not going to happen immediately, but that's what I'm looking forward to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And Anna, you have the hard task to conclude this introduction for why OSMI is important for UNESCO.
Thank you, Laetitia. Of course, as Nicolas was saying in the beginning, from the UNESCO perspective, and knowing that we have the recommendation on open science, which was adopted by 194 member states, when they adopted this recommendation, they also agreed to monitor progress made. So there is progress that is made with the implementation of the recommendation and the different action areas that are listed in the recommendation. But within the recommendation, what we also say is that there is need for a broader monitoring framework for open science, because we actually do not have it. We know that open science, if properly done, really requires a cultural shift within the science systems, and it cannot be monitored the same way that non-open science is monitored. We also know that open science does not only mean openness of publications and data, it also means openness of processes, engagement with other stakeholders, with other knowledge systems. We, for the moment, have absolutely no idea how to monitor those elements of open science. So that's also why it is important to reflect better on these missing elements and how do we get that right in terms of monitoring progress. Another important point for us in particular in UNESCO was that this initiative kind of put together both the technical aspects as well as more policy and kind of principles, bigger picture standards aspects. And that was very, very useful, and it is very useful. That is that we do have a vision and a collective vision for what the monitoring should be, but that also we kind of have a bit of a reality check in terms of, okay, so what do we actually have in place, or where is the gaps in terms of the technical requirements that are also needed to have this kind of monitoring done properly. And then just last thing, I think what is of critical importance for UNESCO going forward is that it is when we are looking into this new monitoring framework for science, that it is reflective of science realities and open science realities from across the world. So we really hope that this OSMI initiative is going to be truly global. We will have to do a little bit more of an effort to get colleagues from other regions even better involved. Already for a first meeting is great to have 100 people represented, at least one person from every region, so that's good. But I think we're going to have to also make an additional effort to make sure that our colleagues working on open science from across the world are represented here, and their views are represented and voices heard. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you very much to everyone for this introduction. So I hope that you have enjoyed this little warm-up because now we're getting to the core with firstly a presentation of the context and organization of OSMI by Vanessa. Then I will present the current status of the principles of open science monitoring, and Anna will present the working groups. So at any time, feel free to ask your questions in the chat. We'll have a session dedicated to questions at the end of the presentation, but in the meantime, at the end of each part, if you have specific questions, well, feel free to ask them. And now for the context, the floor is yours, Vanessa.
Thank you. Could we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So first of all, we've seen many initiatives looking at the quantitative measurement of open science, but as UNESCO in its recommendation so beautifully also presents, there are so many aspects to open science that we do need to analyze going forward. So it's from scientific publications to open research data. Open educational resources are also included in the definition of open science by UNESCO. To what extent are we using open source and open hardware? And then we have the image here about the values of open science and the principles that we should strive to attain. And if we also really do want to embrace those and make progress with those, how are we going to monitor and evaluate how flexible we are, how sustainable we are, how equitable our approaches are, how transparent, and so forth. So we can have our ambitions with policy, but you see it's a very complex environment. And so how do we gain a better understanding of that context? Next slide, please. So the idea of OSMI, it probably was bubbling away before May 2023, but it was officially discussed not in the name of OSMI, but at the G7. The G7 had been discussing open science for a couple of years beforehand, before 2023. They had decided to continue going forward to discuss the ambitions of open science, but in particular, it was decided there to encourage the development of a framework for monitoring, a global framework, to look at the progress and obstacles of open science. Next, please. So what they acknowledged was that there were starting initiatives flourishing worldwide, and that diversity and multiplicity is a good thing and is necessary. But of course, two distinct or incompatible ways may not be the way forward, certainly if you want to compare like with like and to understand our progress globally. So the idea was posed, could we agree on some common principles for monitoring? So preserving initiatives and diversity and local needs, but working towards a common shared goal and seeing how we could do that effectively going forward with some common principles. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we have seen over the last years a development of initiatives. So we have some national monitors. Excuse us for having perhaps more European ones at the moment, but we are keen to find out a lot more about other initiatives across the globe going forward. But just as an example, the Danish Open Access Indicator work was also one of the first quantitative ways to measure open access, but we've also in the meantime had the French Open Science Monitor, which also looks at things beyond the publication, research data and software, and we have other associations like the Helmholtz Association with their Open Access Monitor and so forth. Of course, we've got the UNESCO Open Science Monitoring Working Group, so particularly also built on the UNESCO recommendation, where they're discussing how to implement monitoring globally. And in addition, we also have very ambitious and exciting services like the Curtin University's Open Knowledge Initiative, so real platforms that provide data and compare, and many more. Next slide, please. Something I'd just like to shine a quick light on, because I was at the Munich conference last week. The European funded Pathos project, I think, is a very interesting one because it particularly looks at the impact pathways of open science across academia, society, and economy. And Tony Ross-Hellower gave us a short overview of that work. So I think what's really interesting is looking at the causal pathways for open science also. They are designing and estimating impact indicators. And they're also looking at the cost-benefit analysis for open science. So interesting to look at, but there are many other projects, I think, in the pipeline, and there will be more that address this important subject. But this was just one example I thought I'd just share very briefly. Next slide, please. And of course, we have some strong, influential guidelines and frameworks, and there are more in the making. First of all, I think so many of us know and love the principles of open scholarly infrastructure developed by Cameron Nealon, Lynn, and others. And that there is really the requirement to make data open and legally available. That's really a fundamental to our work going forward, because it allows us to monitor data. So they really emphasize the importance of that when you sustain and develop the open science infrastructure. So I think that's been very influential back in 2020. Of course, 2021, we've already touched on the UNESCO recommendation on open science, but they have a section at the end on monitoring. It's part and parcel of enabling the policy environment, of course. So whenever you set policy, to consider how you are going to monitor that policy going forward is really crucial. And they pointed out that both quantitative and qualitative measures are important, and they called on member states to also consider the unintended consequences. So it's not just looking at the progress, but also at some of those challenges, also on early career researchers, for example. And they highlighted the importance of collecting good practices, which is what we want to do too, and the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach, which I think some of us already mentioned. The UNESCO Open Science Outlook, of course, that actually translates the policy into action, or shows us what some of those statuses and trends are around the world in open science. So building on the recommendation. And so they're monitoring a range of outputs across all the pillars of open. So I think that's very useful, and I'm sure you all know it, which will come out regularly over time. Pathos already touched on, but there's also a handbook which is particularly looking at the academic impact, societal and economic impact on open science. And they have developed some indicators that are useful for what we have today, but they also promise that they will be useful for what we need tomorrow. So sounds promising, good to watch, as with many other projects, but there's a concrete handbook there would be interesting for you to look at. And then lastly, the Declaration on Open Research Information. I think so many of us are very excited by that initiative, where we want to make research information open the norm. So how can we be part of a system-wide transition from closed to open research information, also with the work that we do with monitoring? Next slide, please. So lots of initiatives, but we don't really necessarily have either a common understanding of what we should be monitoring in open science. I touched on that a little bit, but there are so many domains beyond the publication: research data, open source software, clinical trials, open science, other wider open science impacts on society, the costs of open science infrastructures, citizen science, and the role of citizens in sharing information, engagement with other societal actors, and dialogue with other knowledge systems, and more. Next slide, please. Now, the French initiative, the Open Science Monitor Project, national project, which looks to monitor not just publications, but open science and software, led by the French Ministry of Higher Education and Research and the Université de Lorraine and INRIA, has been very influential behind OSMI. They have had a number of discussions and international exchanges also on this matter with Denmark, Portugal, and Germany when they were developing their own monitor, but also since then. And they were also the ones to first draft the initial principles. So a big thank you to them. Next slide, please. So that created a spark for international collaboration. So there was a workshop organized around this time last year. A lot has happened, but the real work gets started very soon. So that was at the UNESCO headquarters. The objective was to bring together some international open science monitoring stakeholders and experts, and to see how we could create a community on the topic and move this forward with the principles. So we had a range of people who came to Paris. Next slide, please. You see them, there. Let's move to the next slide. And we had some concrete outputs. We had various breakout sessions. Some of you are on the call who were there, looking at building a community of practice and at the technical specifications which are necessary to implement these principles on research data and software. So, we brought around 50 people together from 16 countries, and you can have a look at the presentations and outputs there. So that was the starting point for the OSMI work. You've heard from the initiators group. So since that Paris meeting, a number of organizations have committed to see how can we actually really get work moving forward? How can we organize ourselves? And I'm just going to touch on how we are starting to organize ourselves. Next slide, please. So I can tell you, first of all, how we see what the goals are for OSMI going forward. Next slide, please. So first of all, to promote the worldwide adoption of those OSMI open science principles. Secondly, to provide recommendations for the technical specifications for their implementation so that really the work can be done on many different levels. And to support stakeholders on various levels in monitoring open science practices. And I think many of us have spoken to all sorts of topics of interest. So there's a lot of work potentially to be done. Let's move forward. Thank you. So the immediate goals that we have is firstly to finalize those principles. Letitia will tell us where we are with those principles. There's been an open consultation. We've spent some time with that. That's been really important, but we need to finalize those and then launch them and get them out there, not just within Europe, but really globally. So your help will be really needed on that point. And we're going to start with 4 working groups. Anna will tell us more about those working groups later, but I think personally, what's really important is first to scope out the landscape of open science monitoring. What is already being done so that we don't duplicate efforts and that we collaborate where we can. And secondly, to identify the needs and the solutions, particularly the needs from the different stakeholders. And just a sneak peek, so from those who have actually registered for the working groups, many people are keen to be part of the needs working group, and I'm really pleased because that will form the basis of our work going forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so the OSMI organization, let's move forward. The initiators you've already met. And our responsibility at the moment, it's a temporary body before we actually have a board, which we will look at in earnest next year, and maybe other governance structures. But first of all, we've got to make sure that we really do become global and serve the global community going forward. We want to monitor our progress in OSMI, that really things move forward, and resolve any issues that we might come across, or manage any risks. We have actually, in the last year, we had an open call for the working groups. We have approved the initiation of a few working groups, so we're trying to get things started with this selection of working groups, and then of course, we're managing the consultation of the principals, and the initiators keep up to date with the work of the coordination committee. That's, I think I can tell you more about in the next slide. Yeah, so the coordination committee you have also heard about. We oversee the day-to-day operations of OSMI, the communications, the management with our members, and we raise issues, obviously, if there are any, set the agendas, and also act as the public interface of OSMI. And we report to the OSMI initiators. So that's where we are. I think, was that my last slide? Yes, it was. So that's where we are. It's a light touch governance structure at the moment, just to get things started. We really want this to be a global initiative. And as I say, we're going to develop the governance next year. You will hear a lot more about the working groups and how we're really going to get moving with the action. But I'm now going to pass on to Letitia, who will tell us where we are with the principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for this presentation. So I'm just having a look at the chat to see whether there are any questions for now regarding the organization. I don't think there are any. So of course, feel free to ask anything in the chat. Moving forward to the status of the principles and next steps. So firstly, just wanted to present or to remind you the high-level principles for this text that we are commonly drafting. So the higher goals are to acknowledge the diversity of open science monitoring approaches throughout the world, because as Vanessa said, there are many initiatives, many dashboards and monitors existing, and it's really important at the beginning of OSMI to simply know better what exists throughout the world. And you can already see some examples on the OSMI website. You have a page called Monitors, in which you have many links, but you will see that on this page there is what we have found, but we are sure that many other initiatives exist that we are not aware of. So another high-level principle is to provide guidelines to encourage pooling, comparisons, and reuse when possible, because it's really important not to duplicate efforts and also to allow comparability. Another objective is also to help stakeholders like national governments or research performing organizations, international organizations, to set up their own monitoring tools, because not every country, not every institution has yet its own monitoring dashboards. And so the objective is also to have these principles to guide the construction of those dashboards. So the global aim is really to monitor a comprehensive transformation to open science and its impacts on the research ecosystem and on society. So the principles of open science monitoring are divided in 3 parts for now. So the relevance, transparency and reproducibility, and self-assessment and responsible use. So I'm not going to talk in details about every indicator, every principle for now, but just to give you an overview of these main parts of the text. So that the part about relevance focuses on why and how indicators regarding open science should be applicable and clear in scope, but also meaningful for public policy. For instance, you don't want to have indicators that are not designed to monitor something. They also should be co-created, inclusive, comprehensive, mature. So these are a few examples of the principles regarding relevance. Regarding transparency and reproducibility, we also have here some important topics. For example, the communication to the general public, because we do believe that it's important to have transparent indicators that could be provided to everyone in all transparency. And to do that, you have to have a public documentation of processes and methodology. You need to have explicit data provenance, for instance. And in line with the Barcelona Declaration, we also think that the output data should be open. We also thought about the inclusion of fair and care principles, how sampling techniques can be used, how open source software should be used, and so on and so forth. So this part is really about the data that you are using to monitor open science and also the outputs of this monitoring process. The third part is about self-assessment and responsible use, because we are really aware of the gaming risks of such a monitoring process. That's why it's important to constantly self-assess our own monitoring processes and to also have monitor for improvement. And what's really, really important also is to avoid rankings. So these are the principles as they are now, but as Vanessa said, there were national, international consultation that has just been closed. So let's have a look at the inputs that we received. So the call for input was launched on the 6th of June and closed the 30th of November, so quite recently. And we are extremely happy to say that we have received 52 contributions from 150 people in 42 countries and all continents. So we are really pleased to see that this initiative, those principles, made sense to many institutions. And we have received support from many international organizations and institutions. I saw in the chat a link to the support from Science Europe to the principles. So thank you very much for that. And looking at the inputs we received, we had a really, really positive feedback on the initiative in general, but also on the text itself. We had many, many interesting contributions with new wording, new principles that should be added. And the main concern from the feedback that we have received is that the current text is not addressing properly enough the qualitative indicators. So that's something we are really going to look at. And it's extremely important for us to have those inputs to improve the final text. So as you can see on the breakdown of contribution types, mainly the inputs were general on the whole text. We had one input really specific to the introduction, 3 specific for part 1, 7 on part 2, and 1 on part 3. And we had 2 inputs with no link to the principles. So that was a really successful consultation, and we really want to thank you again. So what are the next steps? So as you can see, we had this worldwide consultation between June and November. And now in December, we are firstly going to look at the contributions that include concrete reformulations, because basically we had 2 kinds of contributions, one with specific sentences that should be added or corrected or removed, and we had also inputs with general comments. So we are going to start with the concrete reformulations in December, and in January and February, we are going to take into account in a final version the remaining contributions with general comments. So our objective is to have a final draft and official release in spring. So it's going to take some time because we really want to have a text inclusive and representative of every input, because we do believe that the principles should be really a mirror of monitoring principles around the world. In winter, we aim at the publication of technical specifications related to the principles, but that will depend on the work of the working groups, of course. But that's our next steps as we see them now. And so now that we have presented the current status of the principles, I'm just checking if we have also questions about them. So I see that you have already discussed in the chat. I don't see any hands raised for now. Now the floor is yours, Anna, to talk about the working groups.
Great, thank you very much, Laetitia. And indeed, we already have a fair amount of discussions on the in the chat that will hopefully also take place within the working groups as well. Next slide, please, Laetitia. So for this year and the next year in particular, we have kind of internally decided to start with the following 4 working groups, because we thought that these are really the ones where the biggest needs are, based on the feedback that we have had from the different people who have been around the monitoring of open science in the past few years or so, both in terms of like what needs to be done and in terms of what kind of technical requirements are also needed. So we would like to launch this 4 working groups in parallel, and of course, anybody who would like to join can join more than one working group. There are 2 scoping working groups. One on the needs of open science monitoring. So basically looking into what the problems are, where the gaps are, what the needs are. And another one is on understanding the open science monitoring landscape. Somebody put in the chat that there are so many different initiatives and there is a lot of overlap and not necessarily dialogue between these different initiatives. And what we would like to do is really have a clear, as clear as possible, mapping of who is doing what and addressing which issues, so that we can maybe work more closely together and try to see how we can leverage on the results and the works of all of these different initiatives in a positive way. What is also important from the work on the working groups, the scoping working groups, is they will give us an idea of where the major needs are and where the priorities for action and coordinations are for the future. So based on the results of these scoping working groups, the reports that may come out of those, the mapping exercises, we will be able to then collectively decide what are the next working groups that we have to work on, and where the major needs are for a global coordination mechanism such as this one on open science monitoring. Then we have two technical working groups. One on the open science monitoring with scholarly content providers. And when we talk about scholarly content here, we refer back to the definition basically of the open science knowledge from the UNESCO recommendation on open science. And then we have another working group on shared resources and infrastructure to analyze scholarly outputs. So again, that's on the technical side, what is required to be able to monitor open science. Next slide, please. So looking a little bit more deeper in the first working group, the idea really is to understand what the needs are of the monitoring, and as I said, to guide the open science monitoring community's work in the future, but also to identify who are the key stakeholders, beneficiaries at the international, national, and local level. So we have a pretty good idea individually and in our own networks and silos. What we need to do is to bring all of these things together and see who the stakeholders are, what the needs are, and also what should be monitored, why, and to establish as clear as possible scope for monitoring. It is important that these working groups also kind of coordinate and just be informed by the work of each other, particularly the two scoping working groups. In particular here, it will be interesting to work together with the monitoring landscape or open science monitoring landscape working group, as we said, so that we identify problems on one hand and existing initiatives that provide solutions to those problems in parallel. Next slide, please. For the second working group on the monitoring landscape, that's quite straightforward, trying to understand who are the people, the initiatives, the stakeholders looking into this, the monitoring, what are the different levels, do they overlap, do they not, what types of monitoring they're doing, what kind of questions they are addressing, and again, with the idea of trying to figure out where the synergies are, but also where the gaps are. Next slide, please. The open science monitoring with scholarly content providers is really to understand better how can scholarly content providers address diverse open science monitoring needs. So we are basically talking about publishers, open archives, repositories, standard setting organizations. What are their contributions to the open science monitoring? Again, what their needs are and what their possible inputs are into the monitoring process. And again, it will be important that the working groups inform each other to be as efficient as possible in convening this working group with scholarly content providers and also the other working group on the needs assessments as well. The contributors include research libraries, funders, meta researchers, citizen scientists, others as well who maybe we are not thinking about right now. And the idea really is to facilitate the creation of tailored solutions to meet the diverse open science monitoring requirements. So again, we will be looking into what different stakeholders and contributors can contribute and where the gaps are and what the needs are in that particular field. And the last working group for the moment is the one on shared resources and infrastructure to analyze scholarly outputs. Again, this is a working group that is being created because there is a need, and there were several requests from several institutions, individuals working on these issues who want to kind of come together, figure out what are the open source tools, how do we get to some kind of methodological consensus on which metadata to extract and how. Really about the possible resource pooling and other issues which are really looking into resources, infrastructures, and other technical requirements. And the outcome here is a shared vision on key metadata to extract, shared technologies to use and improve, collective way to share computing resources and extracted metadata. And here I think what is important in general, and of course Letitia and the others can tell you a little bit more details, technical details about this working group and other technical working groups. And the idea is to come up with some kind of consensus and recommendations, but of course, none of this is made so that we are trying to impose a certain methodology or certain way of doing to everybody else. I mean, as we were saying before in Vanessa's presentation, diversity inclusion is extremely important. We do understand that there are different realities in which people in different parts of the world operate, so we have to take that into account. But the idea is really to come up with something that federates the different initiatives and kind of builds around some of the common denominators as well. Next slide, Letitia. So I'm going to stop here. I think we have put in the chat the link to for you to be able to subscribe to the different working groups. As I said, you can subscribe to more than one working group, and we will really be asking you to participate in this working groups with. We will see how often the different working groups will be meeting, what type of information they will be sharing, and how. But it is a commitment to make, and we will be counting on your active participation in this particular working groups. If on the other hand, you just want to stay informed, learn more about the work of the working groups more general, and possibly their results, new events, or other information, then we would invite you to subscribe to the mailing list or to follow us on different social media channels as well. I think the 15th of January is the cutout date for the deadline to apply for the working groups, but of course, if there is interest for people to join those groups later, we will certainly stay open to the possibility of including people even later on. So Letitia, I'm sorry, I may have stepped into your part of the presentation. So go ahead and take us through the different next steps, and then we will open for questions from the audience.
Absolutely, no problem, Anna, you did well. So yeah, as you can see, we are really expecting interesting outputs from these working groups. So as Anna said, we have these 4 working groups, but we will have more working groups afterwards because we also want to have outputs coming from the principles, but the principles first have to be published, of course. So the deadline for applying to a working group is the 15th of January, so you have an online form to fulfill. So I've seen in the chat some people saying, well, I've applied to working group, I didn't hear back. It's completely normal. We are waiting for the end of the process to go back to the people who applied. So it's completely normal if you had no answer for now. So just to emphasize something, if you want to be an OSMI member, it's necessary to be part of a working group. And when you are a member, it means that you are displayed publicly on the website and that you are committing to take part in a working group. Also to make connections to other related initiatives and attend plenary meetings. So we are really expecting an international representation. So when we started talking about these working groups and receiving applications, we already saw an international interest in the working groups. So we hope this will be the same for the end of the process. And if you are interested in OSMI in general, but you don't want necessarily, you don't have time to join a working group, so as Anna said, you can follow OSMI on different channels. So you can join the mailing list directly on the homepage of the OSMI website. And we also have accounts on LinkedIn and Mastodon. So you are more than welcome to follow us on those social medias if you don't want to be involved in a working group. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, looking at my colleagues from the coordination committee if we have anything else to add before the questions. I think that's good. Same from the initiators. Okay, so I guess now we have time for your questions. So you can raise your hands or ask directly on the chat.
Letitia, there's a question in the chat from Mirat. Yes,
Oh,
there she
sorry.
is.
Yeah, hi,
Hi, Leticia. Great presentation. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to repeat what I posted on the chat, but I just wonder if you would be willing to share a little bit more about your plans for interactions or communication channels between the 4 working groups. Just thinking, I mean, the example I gave is that I expect that you would want the outputs and areas of focus of the working groups that are more technically oriented to respond to things that the working group 1 identifies as problems or needs. So, I mean, I just wonder if what your plan towards that. Thank you.
So, so that's something we gonna have to discuss with the initiatives group and inside also the coordination committee. For now, we are receiving applications, and we still have to decide on how well people are going to organize themselves, because we don't want to impose any specific organization. But Anna, yes, if you want to give your thoughts.
Yes, I mean, we will have to figure it out as we kind of go along. But I think one of one of us from this coordination committee will be always in one of the groups. So between us, we will have to also, coordinate and point to certain things that are relevant for the others. So that's one way of keeping each other informed around the different work in the different working groups. The other one is to, from time to time, have a joint meeting of the working groups, where again, the coordination committee would pick up on the issues that are overlapping, and then we can discuss that as well. But I think what is also important is that we would like these conversations to inform each other, meaning that particularly when it comes to technical issues, sometimes your solution might actually come from the technical side and sometimes from the needs side. You don't necessarily add that. That's why, as I said in the beginning, it's very interesting for me personally. We always work on the norms, policies, very rarely get down to the technical levels. And I see very often it would have been better for us to actually develop a policy knowing technically what the needs are from that perspective as well, because one really does inform another. So we don't want to influence too much, so that there is space really for the groups to kind of fertilize each other, but we will have to figure out a way to coordinate amongst the group, and I think that's going to be one of the functions of the coordination committee. What will be to make sure that there is synergies between different.
I see in the chat another question for you, Anna, the relationship between OSMI and the UNESCO Working Group on Open Science Monitoring.
Yes, so what we have done with the UNESCO Open Science Monitoring Group, we kind of divided it in two parts, if you wish. We will continue having the Open Science Monitoring Group to really look, the UNESCO one, to really look into the monitoring of the implementation of the recommendation. So we have together in that working group created a survey that was now sent to member states. The member states will inform us by the 28th of February where they are with their implementation. We will have a look at what has come out from this from the survey results. We will bring that to the working group to have a look at, to see how can we analyze this information, how can we present it. But this is really focusing on the implementation of the recommendation, and that survey follows the actions that were specified in the UNESCO recommendation. The whole work on the broader open science monitoring framework has been now moved in a way to the OSMI initiative, and we have had a joint meeting just a month ago or so, inviting the members of the Open Science Monitoring Group of UNESCO to join OSMI to collectively discuss this broader framework for open science monitoring. So our Open Science Monitoring Working Group remains with the monitoring of the recommendation. OSMI kind of now really looks into more broadly open science monitoring frameworks, technical requirements, principles, and other issues. And of course, the members will be, one can be a member of working groups. I hope that's clear.
Thank you very much. Another question, what are the expected products of the working groups, and what is the duration of the working group to produce a result? So looking at my colleagues, I don't know if we already have a really strict timeline for the outputs for now, as we are simply gathering people for each working group. Just saying that for the outputs, you can already have an idea looking at the website and especially the page on the working groups. We expect, for example, a mapping of initiative, also feedback from countries, institutions having implemented monitoring initiatives, the organization of webinars, also technical specifications, so many different outputs. So yes, please, Vanessa, the floor is yours.
I think it's just to add that it's for the working group, so everybody who signs up to the working group to decide on what the goals are of that working group, to agree on those, and then to think about the concrete outputs and the duration of that work. And just coming back again, those who sign up for the working groups, that you are signing up to get involved and to help us work through these things, right? So the more hands we have, the more we can do. So it's a bit open, and as Letitia says, some things are a bit clearer, where you can imagine what concrete outputs will be delivered, but it's really for the working group members to decide on that and agree. But we certainly want to have concrete outputs, and that it's not just a talking shop. Just need to be clear on that one.
Thank you, Vanessa. Christopher, go ahead, please.
Hey, hi, Leticia. So,
Hi.
Chris Erdman from SciLife Lab. Vanessa, you were saying something early on that I think is actually important with all of us coming together, is some of these governmental aspects and some of the concerns around AI. And I think, that should be something considered too, is that if we have, this group coming together that has data from different places and, just all this experience, at the moment, this seems like an important point, with some of the changes, that we're seeing, and maybe nothing, something, that's big, but something that could be a statement or something like that. But I don't know if it fits within one of the working group activities or, but it seems like we need to speak to this at the moment, in some way.
I would suggest that you either join the working group on needs or you share something with us in writing, and we can take that forward if you don't want to get involved yourself in the needs working group. But I think that point is well taken. Thank you.
I don't know which group I'm in, but all right.
I think the needs one is working group 2, I think. But have a look at the link in the chat. As I say, if you don't have the time to be part of that group, then you can also just share your share a bit more with us by email is also fine, and we can represent that and bring that forward in the working group.
Thank you very much. So we have another question. Is there any sort of ballot process for the approval of outcome doc? I'm not quite sure I understand what's beyond. Oh, Anna, maybe you know.
Yeah, I think it's more about how do we, if there are deliverables, those deliverables are some reports or some documents, how do we ensure the validation of these documents? This is how I understood the question. And I think we're going to work just by consensus. There is no specific way to validate, and these are all people who are committing their time to this, and I do not foresee need for any specific very official way of validating the documents, but rather like a consensus around the final versions of the documents.
Yeah, and as Vanessa said in her presentation, we are also working on building up a governance for OSMI in the coming months. So you may see OSMI as a newborn, and we don't yet have a proper international governance, but this is going to be an important objective for 2025. But yeah, as my colleague said, it's important to have a light touch and to get work done without being, blocked by too many validation processes. Another question, this one is easy, I guess. Do we need to have a formal affiliation to participate in a working group? So looking at my colleagues, I don't think it's really important. You can have, what's important is what you are bringing to the working group. And if you do have time and energy and knowledge, we are welcoming everyone. Yeah. And it's related also to another question. Will all those who apply to join working groups will be accepted, or will there be a selection process? So there is no selection process, and we are welcoming every goodwill. Another question, could you say something about the funding background of OSMI? The goals are very large and important for the scientific community, especially in this case. The project coordination should be secured for the long term. So we don't have funding yet, not really. Well, I can speak for me. The French Ministry of Higher Education and Research is financing some part of my time for my commitment in OSMI. And for UNESCO and Spark Europe, I will let my colleagues answer directly.
It's the same. I mean, for UNESCO, it's kind of an in-kind contribution. We find it as something that is very important, and we will make sure to continue engaging. But definitely having Letitia and Vanessa and Andrea also there is very important. So the French ministry is for the moment, in a way, the only official donor in a way. But we are hoping, once we get the work started, I'm sure that there will be maybe some others who will be able to provide some support. As we said, it is more about the time of people. So secondments from institutions or just commitment from different institutions to be part of the coordination committee or coordination structure is going to be something that is very, very important. And then going forward, we will see if there is funds needed for some additional things like some meetings or something. But we will also be looking into the members of the working groups and the members of OSMI in general. Maybe there will be opportunities to get together or organize something from their side as well. So we'll have to. We don't have like secured funds, but we do have goodwill, and for the moment, the commitment from the different organizations, at least those that are initiators and part of the coordination committee.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to this, Vanessa or Andrea. No? Okay. Yes, a hand raised from Ricardo.
Hey, hello, everybody.
Hi.
Just guessing this question related to the documentation and their validation. Maybe it could be useful to collect more info from the participant in the working group related to, I work in the Universidad Central de Chile, but really I don't have any support from my university. And even though I'm from Chile, I don't have any relationship with the organization who manage the knowledge or the agency who manage the knowledge in Chile. So not because I'm in the country or a university, I got any kind of relationship or support or anything related to. So to provide the better representation of different actors of open science, maybe we need also the institution, country, what are your role, and if you got any responsibility or not. Because in that way, we got a better diversity of who is working on. By that way, maybe the document is more valid by itself, because most of the initiative, they only say country, institution, and nothing else. And that's not a good way to see the integration. Yeah, that's my thought.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Yes, so that's also something we have to work on. And I think what we are doing now is bringing together expertise from individuals. And regarding the commitment of institutions, it will have to do with the construction of the governance. But yeah, for now, I think we are recruiting individual talents, and we will have to work this out.
Yeah, if I can just continue on that, getting the commitments of the different institutions is very different from getting experts to consider issues and work on recommendations that then they can put forward within their institutions. Working for UNESCO, which is an international organization, and this is what we do. We put forward recommendations, even those that are negotiated by member states. there is no reinforcement mechanism for different countries to actually implement everything that is in those recommendations. But the fact of having an international group of experts, like in this case, who has put forward together some recommendation, it can still be a powerful way of then working with institutions to actually take them on board and implement them. Maybe one of the next working groups can be precisely on that, and that is, how do we make sure that the institutions are taking up the products of the group? How do we create consortia? What are our pilots? And then through that, we kind of figure out what the best ways are to take the products of these working groups at the institutional level as well. But again, something that needs to be discussed and brought in our discussions in the different working groups and in the discussion of OSMI more broadly.
So we have a few minutes left. I see another question. Does Working Group 2 about open science monitoring landscape is going to try to catch the creators of existing open science monitoring into OSMI technical working groups? So I think that could be one objective, yes, to pinpoint technical experts from institutions that we have missed. And yes, absolutely, because I think the technical working groups do need specialized people on particular technologies, and if some are spotted by working group 2, well, it's all the best if they can make them join more technical working groups. So we had a question about the time commitment for these working groups. So as it was said in the chat, that is something we will have to discuss at the beginning of next year. We had also a question about the multilingualism and having documents in other languages, and especially in French in this question. So for now, everything is in English. I don't think that for now we have the resources to engage in translating documents for now, but that's really important. And yeah, I know that UNESCO and Spark Europe have experience in these areas. So
for me, it's a question for the working groups as well. So how can we ensure this multilingualism? What are the AI models or AI tools that can help us at this point? How can we? It's critical, and we now start having really tools that can help us. We are still kind of shying away from using those for a variety of reasons, but I think it's one of the key questions basically for all of the working groups and the work of the monitoring initiatives, monitoring initiative in general. And again, this connection with artificial intelligence, for me, one of the benefits that we can have eventually is this. I mean, I cannot wait the day that we will be able to talk to each other like this, and you will be able to speak each and every one of you in your own language, myself included, and be able to understand each other because there is an AI mechanism that can help us with that. So super interesting point. Let's really think about it while we work in the working groups, and let's see how we can leverage the AI tools existing or new ones or anything else that can be used in that direction.
thank you very much, and thank you, Irache, for your comments. So I think we don't have any more questions. Oh, yeah, we do have one. Who is leading, coordinating a working group? Does the members decide? So, yeah, for now, we are just asking for participants, and we will ask the members of each working groups how they want to work and who is wanting to chair and to organize the meetings. as Anna said, with the help of the coordination committee, because we are getting involved in working groups as well, but not necessarily as chairs. So really it's important for you to think about what kind of participation you have in mind, and if you're interested in chairing. And of course, if my colleagues from the committee want to add something, feel free to do so. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Okay, so I guess we can wrap this up. And thank you very, very much for your participation and for your enthusiasm for OSMI. We are looking forward to welcoming you in the working groups. So you will have the recording of this meeting as well as the presentation. You already have access to the presentation through the link sent by Andrea, but it will be also properly displayed on the website. So keep in mind that you have until the 15th of January to apply to working group, and we are looking forward for the next steps. Thank you very much.